Hello and good evening. We are the HR group, and today we're going to be talking about how to deal with a bad boss. And some of the items we're going to dive into are: what are the characteristics of a bad boss? Why are bad bosses bad for organizations, and how do they affect the employees of an organization? And then what are our approaches to dealing with a bad boss? So my name is Lindsay Leahy. I'm your moderator tonight. We also have Sarah Rosinski, Michael Goss, Diego Gamboa, and Brandon Torres here tonight joining us. So just to get us started and kicking us off, can anyone here describe some characteristics of a bad boss?
Sure, I'd be happy to take that. I think when you think about a bad boss, there's and the characteristics they have, there's a bit of a two-pronged answer to that. First, how do you as an employee identify a bad boss? And some of these traits are pretty easily identifiable. As an employee, they'll do things like micromanage you and your time and the work you're doing while providing input on every single detail. That can be a bit of a disempowering thing and feel like you have no autonomy over your work. Conversely, they could provide zero oversight over your work and not really even be informed about the work you're doing, and just leaves you feeling directionless. They could also be an awful communicator and do a horrible job at informing you of the things that are needed for you to succeed in your job, and just not really communicate what those expectations are to you. I think a boss at their worst may be incapable of honoring your humanity, and they'll overwork you, create a hostile work environment, doing things like gossiping. They'll have like a me versus you type of mentality, and they just won't even acknowledge those who are succeeding within the organization, and may even take the credit themselves. On a less insidious level, they'll just be indecisive and passive and just kind of not really provide insight on what's happening. As an employee, when you're not getting concrete detail, you'll feel helpless and you won't even know if you're doing a good job. So with some of these characteristics in mind, I'm wondering if anyone in the group has had experiences with a bad boss.
Yeah, Brandon, actually a lot of the points you've hit on, I can think of a number of bosses that either had, some of those bullet points you mentioned, or even a combination. I won't bore you with all of those different bosses, but I can say that some of the worst feelings and wanting to leave those situations was definitely those who created that dog-eat-dog environment, like you mentioned, or just didn't give credit where it was due at all. And then throwing that on top of being overworked. I can, through experience, tell you that that's definitely some of the worst characteristics you can find.
Yeah, thank you for that. And I think, so that's sort of the personal example. And then the second prong, as far as how does HR identify a bad boss when HR doesn't work directly with that supervisor? I think if a manager is receiving persistent complaints from an employee regarding the manager's employees, that's a pretty good indicator that there's a pattern of behaviors occurring. For example, if multiple people come forward and complain that a manager takes up to a week to respond to an email, that might be indicative that a manager has communication issues. Poor employee morale as well can be detectable, sometimes through performance reviews or employee satisfaction surveys, things like that, or even visible discontent at work if your employees have poor morale. These things can be all connected to a bad boss. Additionally, in such as like the employee satisfaction surveys and stuff like that, if staff express that their growth is hindered and there's no real opportunity for upward mobility, things like that could be attributed to a bad boss. So with all of these characteristics I've described, both from the employee and HR perspective, these things can lead to employees leaving an agency. So if an agency is experiencing high turnover, what costs could a company incur due to this type of poor supervision?
Thanks, Brandon. I'll take that question. So management guru Peter Drucker once said the most valuable asset in the 20th century was the actual machines that ran the company. But in the 21st century, that knowledge, the knowledge that the employees have and their productivity. So workers are a huge investment to the company. And a company wants to do everything they can to ensure that they stay. So there's a saying that says that people don't quit jobs, they quit bad bosses. The cost of replacing an employee can be quite detrimental, not only financially, but also a big hit to the company and the morale. So it can lead to lost productivity time, lost knowledge that could be taken to a competitor, Also, stress on the other workers because they'll have to pick up that workload. A company could benefit from developing a system that empowers the employees to provide feedback on the managers and their supervisors so they can ensure that they're effective in the company. For example, Google regularly surveys its employees about their managers. And the survey results show that who the best managers are, that information is made public to all employees. And the underperforming managers are coached, and that leads to a 75% improvement in management effectiveness overall.
Wow. So is there anyone, do you think that bad bosses can be avoided?
Definitely. There's a couple of different things. First, it seems like the easy part would be don't hire them. And how you can avoid doing that is through your recruitment process, really looking at the competency-based analysis, knowledge and abilities that have to be included is complete emotional intelligence. I think that's one of the determining factors in all the characteristics that Brandon previously mentioned. By having that in the recruitment process, questions about it, how being aware of other people's emotions, understanding your own, I think it does a couple things. One, really puts up front that the company is aware of what emotional intelligence is and its importance straight away. And two, really allows the hiring supervisor to get to know the person for who they are, not just what they do. I can't tell you how many times being in interviews and feeling nervous, not being able to ask maybe additional questions to dive deeper into the interview and get to know the person better. So by including them up front, you maintain that integrity of the interview process. Everyone's asked the same thing, and the hiring supervisor can really get to know that person. Secondly, I think if you are in the situation where the bad boss is already hired, it's the question of, are bad bosses born or created? So if they are there, whatever that is, they're there, the bad boss, making sure that HR is committed to evaluations being done regularly and that they have trainings provided about communication, for communication, and those difficult conversations to have to address those types of issues, and also continue training on the emotional intelligence. So that makes me wonder, how does HRMs respond to negative supervisors or employee relationships, and how they protect their employees from those bad bosses?
Well, I think first is, and I'll just get this topic out of the way, is there's always going to be, the employee and supervisor that just don't get along, right? There's going to be a conflicting personalities issue, or maybe just disagreeing with the way the company should be going or decisions that should be made. So those are usually not necessarily related to bad bosses, but personality conflicts, and usually can be handled either through mediation with the HR manager, or even really explaining to an employee why decisions are being made and bringing them into that process. So setting that portion aside, getting into the actual topic of an actual bad boss, as Brandon had mentioned, about how we discover bad bosses. So either through performance evaluations or 360-degree reviews, we're able to really see what the actual problem is with the supervisor. So then the HR manager can try and custom fit a program to actually get that manager or that supervisor up to par. So either internal or external trainings, they can offer some coaching or mentorship, is always a good option, and which helps guide the manager, the supervisor, along the process, and always has like someone they can rely on and lean on as they're working in their day-to-day job. If all of these fail, and probably as a last resort, because this is where you can probably have some sensitivities with staff, if a manager is just not wanting to change and just fighting the system and it's continually a problem, then the HR manager can actually look at potentially modifying some responsibilities. And maybe this person is good at what they do, but they're just not a good supervisor, and finding another role for them to fit. But I would say that overall, it is HR's job to look into protecting the employees, both the supervisor as well as the direct report. So Diego, do you think you can expand on that a little bit?
Yeah, thank you. I was doing some research, and really there are employee retaliation protection laws. So it really is HR's responsibility to ensure that they can implement these laws in a way that employees feel protected. It's not enough to say that the law is in place to mean that someone feels comfortable in telling their supervisor how they're, quote, a bad boss. And one thing that the HR can do is to also conduct exit interviews. Exit interviews are a way for HR to understand why people are leaving. So for example, I left a company because of a bad boss, and that gave me, they gave me the opportunity to do an exit interview, and they used that information as to what I experienced to further develop their managers. In addition, HR can work on stronger retention plans. So understanding that pay isn't the only reason people stay, and bosses can have an effect on that. So what kind of benefit packages are they providing to alleviate for the stress of a job?
Great. So what else is something that an HR manager can do to better prepare managers within their organization?
Hey, that's a great question. So sometimes managers are promoted to the position without any kind of training or preparation for the role they're about to take on. So sometimes like a manager works really well with their coworkers before they're promoted, then all of a sudden they're put in this role where not only do they have to lead projects, but they also have to take care of those managerial duties. So HR should specifically create training that is tailored towards the management classification. So they can train on how to work with employees, how to delegate, how to motivate employees, and other challenging employee issues that may arise, how to handle them. Other trainings should focus directly on making the manager more effective. They can teach them project management skills, technical skills like managing a budget, and other skills that would be very helpful to be a manager.
Great. Well, I thank you guys all for joining us tonight. And just to kind of recap what we discussed. So Brandon talked about the characteristics of a bad boss and what to see, what employees experience, and how what HR managers actually see. We touched on how to deal with it, why it's bad for organizations, as well as some trainings that can be sought out by HR managers. And some additional resources, just at least here in San Diego, there's a Center for Organizational Effectiveness. This is some training that I've personally taken, and I thought it was great. They have management and supervisor academies where they go into emotional intelligence, Myers-Briggs and personality reading, and it's a lot of really great tools for managers to, and skills that managers can pick up in order to work with their employees. Again, there's coaching and training services that are also available to new managers that should really seek out these opportunities. And honestly, managers that have been doing this for a long time, it's never too late to keep sharpening that pencil and keep expanding your skill set. So again, I thank Sarah, Michael, Diego, and Brandon for joining us tonight. I'm Lindsay Leahy, and tune in next time.